Welcome to another Telltale Books video. And on this date that I'm first premiering this video on YouTube, it is the anniversary of the birth of Catherine L. Moore, one of the earliest female science fiction writers and one of the best science fiction writers. C.L. Moore was born in 1911, January 24th. in Indianapolis, Indiana. She died April 4th, 1987. In this video, I'm going to cover her first 4 stories because her first 3 stories were very short flash fiction type stories that she published in her college newspaper at the University of Indiana, which is, you can find the stories in PDFs of the newspaper that the University of Indiana makes available on their website. So the first one of those stories is titled Happily Ever After. It was published in November of 1930. And the magazine was titled The Vagabond. Very, very short, very simple story, imagining what happened after Cinderella married the prince. So that's why the title Happily Ever After. I don't want to tell too much about that because if you should want to look it up and read it, I don't want to spoil it. Just to say any more would spoil it. And like I say, you can look it up online at the University of Indiana, look up their Vagabond newspaper, find the November 1930 issue, and it's in there. You can read it online. Very short story, won't take up much of your time. Humorous and actually nicely written. This isn't anything great. This isn't a top tale, but it was fun and it was worth the read. I liked it. Probably only somebody who is a C.L. Moore completist would want to read it. Now, this is a start of C.L. Moore's writing career. She would go on to write for Weird Tales and other pulp magazines. And in the 1940s, she and Henry Kuttner were married, and they wrote a lot of fiction together. I think it's one of those situations where it's hard to tell just who wrote what. They wrote a lot of collaborative fiction and published it under pseudonyms, and it's lost to history just who did most of the writing on which stories. And some people speculate that C.L. Moore did most or all of the writing. I kind of don't think so. I think that's people wanting to rewrite history from a feminist point of view. But either way, it doesn't matter. She had a big hand in writing a lot of the greatest classics of science fiction, both on her own and with her husband, Henry Kuttner. And so we should honor them both and what they achieved. And this was the start, Happily Ever After. Like I say, I'm going to cover all 3 of these little works. The second one she published in The Vagabond is called Samira. I don't know if Samira was a historical character. It was published in the March 1931 Vagabond. And Samira is a woman who comes to a court with the intentions of securing a high place for herself. She wants to become queen. And so she sets her sight on marrying a prince who will become king. And then she does away with the king, and she marries the prince, and the prince becomes king, and she gets everything she wants. But there are brothers, and they don't like this situation. They don't like her, and they don't like the whole situation. I'm going to end with that. It goes on. It's kind of a fantasy story, and it's a pretty good story. It's interesting. It's very short, and I think it would have fit into the 1920s Weird Tales, that sort of thing. But even though nothing actually weird happens in the story, it still does remind me of some of the, like, Clark Ashton Smith style stories that I've read so far. And it's a pretty good story. Like I say, probably only for the Seal Moore completist, but it's worth seeking out and worth the tiny bit of time it'll take you to read it. So that's number 2. Number 3, also published in the Vagabond, is titled Two Fantasies, and it's literally that. It's 2 stories for the price of 1. In the April 1931 issue of the Vagabond, the first story is just simply about a young girl, a child, playing on the beach, and she sees this woman. And the woman is made of sea foam and water, but comes up on the beach, and the two of them kind of look at each other, and then the sea woman walks on. And that's the whole story, literally. It's written very well. It's a cool story to read for the description and the atmosphere, but very, very short, and nothing much really happens. And then the second story is just a description of a ruthless king. That part I didn't care for much. It didn't do much, didn't go much of anywhere. It really wasn't much of a story. So this one, again, the Seal Moore completist, definitely in this case, the Seal Moore completist is the only person that would have an interest in digging this story up. So that's her first 3 stories, written in 1930 and 31. And then she didn't publish anything that I know of until 1933, actually late in 1933. She made her first real professional publication with a story in Weird Tales magazine. In the November 1933 issue of Weird Tales, she published a story which would really impress itself on the genre forever. And that story is titled Shambleau. I think that's how you pronounce it. Shambleau. It's probably French. The characters in the story even remark on that they think it's French. I don't speak French, so I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but it is the very first. It's a novelette length piece, so it's a little longer, which is nice. I think it needed to be a little longer. And it is the very first story in the series she wrote about a character named Northwest Smith, who was a spacer, kind of like, he's often looked upon as the inspiration for Han Solo. Okay, that pretty much tells us all you need to know about Northwest Smith to know what these stories are going to be like. He's kind of like that. But in this story, what happens, he's out on the street of a Martian town. Okay, Mars has atmosphere, it's populated. It's 1933. We believe things like that back then. And Earthmen have gone out and gone all around the solar system and met other beings on other planets. Okay, so there's a whole solar system, and it's mostly populated, and we're flying spaceships all over. And this story happens to take place entirely on Mars in this one city. And what happens is Northwest Smith is out on the street, and this woman comes running past him into an alley. And then he sees this whole crowd of people that were obviously pursuing her. And so he puts her behind him, and the people come up, and they want to kill her. And, well, the woman, she's otherworldly looking, with kind of like cat eyes and dark skin. But she's described as just the most beautiful creature you would ever want to see, the most beautiful woman, the most perfect body. So Northwest Smith, being a guy, he tells them to get lost, that he owns her, that she belongs to him. And they basically think, well, okay, fine, you're making a mistake, man, but they take off and leave her alone. So he takes her back to it's like a hotel room he's staying in And that's when she starts letting herself out. She takes her turban off to reveal that she has these reddish snakes for hair. And she ensnares him because she's just so incredibly beautiful. And for her to look at him doesn't actually turn him to stone, but does paralyze him where he just can't resist. And so then she basically just covers him, and these snakes grow out and completely envelop him. And she's sucking off of his life force. So kind of Medusa, kind of a vampire. I'm not doing justice to the story at all. It is so beautifully written. The writing is so incredible in this story. This is better than almost everything else that I've read from the 1930s. It is so well written. The sequence of Northwest Smith becoming entangled in this creature, while it doesn't get pornographic, it still is very enticing, very erotic, beautifully told. The only weakness of the story is that too much of the ending is basically explanation of what just happened. But I don't mind it at all. I didn't think that was terrible at all. It went on a little too long, a little too much tell, not show. But it already did show. And so then it was just kind of tying up the loose ends and letting you know what was really going on with this creature. But it's the writing of the story. It's a simple story, a simple science fiction horror story, but the writing is just so beautiful. It's great. It is really great. Reading it, you know why C.L. Moore is hailed as one of the great writers of the science fiction genre, science fiction and fantasy. So that's about all I have to say about it. It's one of the best science fiction stories I've ever read. It's definitely a classic. It's definitely a top tale. It's definitely recommended. And this is the start of me going through everything. And what I'm doing here is a little different. Because of the 1940s, because C.L. Moore and Henry Kuttner were married and they wrote together, and there isn't a clear documentation of who wrote what. And I have the feeling that a lot of it truly was collaborative, where you can't separate them out. You have to treat them as the two together as one writer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow through both of them, C.L. Moore and Henry Kuttner, in order of publication, and cover everything I can get my hands on. I have already talked about Henry Kuttner's first story, which was published 3 years after this in 1936, The Graveyard Rats. That too is a brilliant story. It's a very, very cool kind of Lovecraftian horror story that, well, it's in a lot of ways better than Lovecraft because it's not so cosmic. It's a little more, I hate to say it because it's a pun, it's down to earth. If you've read this story, you know why that's really bad. But it is a little more down to earth, not so cosmic as Lovecraft, but it's such a powerful horror story. And I've already covered that one, so go and check out my video. Emily was in that one with me. Check out that in our backlist. I'm going to keep going through and covering in order of publication everything by C.L. Moore and Henry Kuttner. And along that line, C.L. Moore is still next. She published a bunch of stories before Henry Kuttner published his in 36. So her next story is another one that's very well known, titled Black Thirst. And that's another Northwest Smith story. And you can get this story in a lot of places. I happen to have it. This is the Glance Fantasy Masterworks titled Black Gods and Scarlet Dreams by C.L. Moore. It's all of her Northwest Smith stories, and there's one of the Jarell of Joeri story in this volume. It's a good book. And I got it, yes, for $5.98 at Half Price Books, but I can't get their damn sticker off. I hate that. So, what have you read, Shambleau? I'm sure a lot of you have. I'm sure a lot of you agree with me. Some of you may not. Leave your comments. Leave your comments about C.L. Moore. And come on back for more. I'm going to keep doing these. Hopefully until I reach the end of them.